Today we're going to be talking about Nosferatu 2024. It's the long-awaited remake of the century-old original Nosferatu from 2022. This is directed by Robert Eggers, who also directed plenty of other horror classics, The Witch, The Lighthouse, Northman. This movie stars Bill Skarsgård, Willem Dafoe, Lily Rose Depp, Emma Corrin, Nicholas Hoult, and Ralph Ineson. I think the best part of this movie is definitely the legacy. Knowing that the original was in theaters over a century ago and then getting the privilege to watch it now in modern day, that's actually a pretty cool feeling. It feels like we're living history. And we're definitely going to see a lot more remakes these upcoming years. Steamboat Willie becoming in the public domain, Winnie the Pooh, and so on. We're definitely going to expect some more very old school classics, golden Hollywood, making a comeback. To be quite honest, I didn't dig this movie as much as I wish I did, but I can definitely see this becoming an instant classic. Trigger warnings for a lot of nudity, gore, intense sexual imagery, and children dying. The one thing to note, especially if you're going in with the mentality of, oh, this is just going to be sort of a straightforward horror movie, this is Robert Eggers, who does not always do straightforward horror movies. Compared to the rest of his filmography, it's definitely a bit more appealing to mass audiences. It's not as symbolic as, say, The Lighthouse. I will say I've only seen 3 of his 4 movies so far. I've seen The Lighthouse, The Witch, and now Nosferatu. I have not seen Northman yet. Nosferatu, it is a horror and it is a drama, but it's also an erotic thriller, which really isn't my thing. That is something to watch out for. If you decide to go with the family in the holiday season and watch Nosferatu, you got that in store for you. Pretty much every kill is depicting Nosferatu doing the classic vampire bite, but it's portrayed very intimately, or to be more directly, very sexually. To be fair, it is sort of in character with the origins and the lore of vampires. The whole point of vampires is they're supposed to be the sort of the direct reflection of lust, maybe even bits of greed, the art of like sort of luring and seducing a victim to eventually prey on them. There is quite a bit of nudity, plenty of sexual imagery. The movie accomplishes exactly what it goes for. I cannot take points away from that, from intention, but it's just not my thing. The atmosphere is solid. The color palette is tons of grays and blues. It was perfect that it released in December and winter. There's tons of gusts of wind, large cathedrals, large castles, incredibly immersive. You feel like you're stuck in the darkness and isolated alone with the characters. It's so gray and so blue that typically when you see fire in movies, you would see that as a threat, but in this movie, it's actually a form of comfort. Anytime you see yellows and whites and reds, it's a sign of like, okay, we're safe for now. Another note I would like to add, the effects are top-notch. Nosferatu looks like he is deteriorating while remaining very threatening. Bill Skarsgård does not look like himself in this movie. You feel like you really are on location. 10 out of 10 with immersiveness. The tone of this movie is quite serious. It's very grounded. This time around, Nosferatu is almost a symbolization of the plague. They sort of call him the demon of the night. Personally, for me, it almost felt like he was one of the 4 horsemen. Like there was a sense of huge mythos surrounding him. And with him, he brought the plague. He brought famine. He brought pestilence. And it's like, oh shoot, all that's left is conquest and war. You know what I mean? There is hints of humor throughout the movie. Willem Dafoe, he's practically my favorite part of this film. He almost reminds me of a modern day Dr. Loomis from Halloween. He's sort of the classic Van Helsing character that mentors the main characters of this film, but he's a bit ditzy. And I definitely agree to the point of Willem Dafoe is just currently in side quest right now, and it's really cool to see. I've been loving him in everything. There's a recurring gag in this film where anytime someone stresses out or there's a very intense sequence, it immediately cuts to someone smoking. In the first half of the film, it's claimed to have better pacing. I actually dug the pacing throughout the whole film. Yes, it is a bit of a slow burn. The first half, it's almost split up between Nosferatu and almost an Exorcist-like arc, where Willem Dafoe plays the role as the exorcist, and Lily Rose Depp seems to be the one possessed. And we go back and forth between Nicholas Hoult traveling towards Count Orlok's manor, and Willem Dafoe trying to get the spirit out of Lily Rose Depp. It's Count Orlok himself controlling her from afar. During one of the most intense sequences, it immediately cuts to Willem Dafoe revealing a bong, and that was probably the biggest laughter we got in the theater. The second half focuses on Nosferatu coming towards their location through boat, and with the boat comes with the rats, and with the rats come the plague. I also forgot to mention Aaron Taylor Johnson, another standout of the film, and Simon McBurney. All of these actors did well. They executed all their roles perfectly. There were no distractions. It was an overall solid remake of the original. I do personally prefer the original a bit more. Again, my biggest critique is I'm not a fan of a lot of the erotic stuff on scenes, but it makes sense in the case of the story. Definitely, of course, spoiler alert with the ending. How I interpreted it was the entire movie was about Nosferatu sort of seducing and lure his victims towards him to make them work for him, especially from Simon McBurney's character, who's sort of like the Igor. He was constantly allowing Nosferatu to use his body as a tool or a vessel. Likewise with Lily Rose Depp. The ending had Lily Rose Depp lure Nosferatu to her, where they would make love together as the sun was rising up. So I thought it was a very poetic ending of Nosferatu falling for the very seduction that he would use to prey on his victims with. If you are a fan of Robert Eggers, I do recommend watching this in theaters. If you're an overall horror fan, it's worth trying out. This one was just not my cup of tea. Regarding vampire movies, I prefer a lot of stuff like Fright Night, From Dusk Till Dawn, or The Lost Boys. Definitely more on the fun aspect of it. And Nosferatu is completely grounded. So if you dig that type of tone, more of a period piece, please go for it. One more note, Bill Skarsgård's voice in this movie is actually one of the best voices I've heard in all film. Not the accent, but his first introduction as Nicholas Hoult is walking into the manor. Bill Skarsgård's voice just reverbs and echoes throughout the entire castle's cathedrals. And it sounds very ancient, like you are talking to a real entity that's centuries old. And there's an interesting mythos regarding Nosferatu that he wasn't himself just bit by a vampire and then he turned to a vampire, but he was actually a dark sorcerer prior to him dying. And now he's an undead entity that has this lingering, dark, mysterious past, which I find a lot more threatening than just a vampire who got bit by another vampire. And to wrap up, a little history lesson, of course, for those who are not in the know, because I would personally assume everyone in film would already be up to date. But then coming out of the theater, it turns out a lot of people didn't realize Nosferatu is directly attached to Dracula. Nosferatu 1920-22 was the first depiction of a vampire in film, I believe, if not the first interpretation of Dracula himself. A German adaptation of the book into film, except they didn't want any copyright lawsuits, so they used the word Nosferatu. Then when we got Bela Lugosi's Dracula, that was the first time we got a Western rendition, which makes it even cooler to me because it seems like the mythos in real life is we are referring to a vampire and we have different tales from different ends. It's the same boogeyman we're talking about. It's like that theory of Mad Max where every movie is actually the same story, just told from different perspective. Like Mad Max Fury Road is the same Mad Max with Mel Gibson, but it's a game of telephone of verbal stories passed down orally. Same thing with Dracula and Nosferatu. I think that's pretty cool. On a critical standpoint, I'd give this movie an 8 out of 10. On a personal standpoint, I would actually give it a 4 out of 10, 4 or 5. I personally wouldn't go out of my way to watch it again. Maybe if it showed up on streaming services, I wouldn't go out of my way to own it. But I can definitely see this flying high with critics and fans. Definitely more of a date night movie. This is not one to watch with a big group, I would not say. I think that's a bit awkward. But who knows, if that's your group, then go for it. Overall, it's a solid movie. I have nothing against it.